Can everybody hear me okay? Good? Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming out and hearing me talk early this morning. And let's give a round of applause for everybody that makes BSides possible. So it's awesome that you have a community that puts on their own time and effort just to get folks to share, to learn, and collaborate. So a huge fan and everything that's going on here. Just came from Cleveland, Ohio. I was surprised that there's no snow here. We had like that much snow this morning. Funny story, I was Carlos Perez just joined TrustedSec, and he was over this week, and I had him over for dinner last night over our house. And so the snow was starting to get really bad, and so I have a Tesla, which has autopilot, which does not work in the snow, by the way. But I drove it home with his book bag in the car, and his hotel is about 30 minutes away from my house. I live like in the middle of the country. I don't like being next to people. I got there and we had dinner and everything, and then I said it was so bad outside, we take my wife's SUV and drive home. So I drove home, or drove him home and it was really bad outside. I mean, I couldn't even see the road. I didn't know if I was even on the road or not. I mean, it's an SUV, you can pretty much drive wherever you need to get to your destination. But I got there and Carlos forgot his bag at my house. So I had to drive a half hour back, and then drive a half hour again, and then half hour back again to get my stuff. So I got back at like midnight, and then I drove at like 5 o'clock this morning to get here. So I'm fresh. I feel good. I showered. So that's most important. But I'm Dave Kennedy. I'm the founder of TrustedSec and Binary Defense. We're located in Cleveland, Ohio. We have folks all over the country. We specialize in a lot of different areas around security consulting and all that good stuff, but I won't get into any of that. But I've had a great career, and it's a testament to the industry around how many people I've gotten to learn off of and to be able to create cool things like the Social Engineer Toolkit or Unicorn or a lot of the other ones. One of the ones hopefully I can demo and move it over to my other computer here would be Trevor C2. On a few of the other ones, but I've been very fortunate on that side, testified in front of Congress and all that good stuff. I help on the Mr. Robot TV show. So if you saw some of the episodes, that last season was really neat. They actually mentioned my name. Elliot was trying to get his way out of the building, and they said, "Oh, I'm Dave Kennedy. I work in sales or whatever," and that was kind of cool. And I've also been in a rap video, which is really weird. I had never thought I'd be in a rap video before. More of like a heavy metal grunge type person, and I literally most awkward situation I've probably ever been in my life. There was like dancers everywhere, and I'm sitting there typing on a keyboard. So, but hey, life experiences, and you kind of go through them. So what I'm talking to you about today is what I get to see going into different customers. I've been doing red teaming and penetration testing and research for a long time, and it's interesting to see. If I would have did a talk 5 years ago, I would have said that the industry isn't getting better, that I use the same techniques that I use every single day that I used 10 years ago to get into computers. I would say that MS-080667 is still everywhere, and that social engineering is one of the easiest attack vectors to get into infrastructure. And I would say that it's trivial for me. It takes me minutes to get into a company versus some other things. But what I can say is doing assessments over the past year, I've seen so much progress in the information security space around the blue team, around defense. And why? And I started looking at why that was. And what's interesting is a lot of the red teamers are sharing what they're doing. And it's amazing to see the collaboration between red and blue and understanding what we do as attackers. I'm just as guilty of this, but I used to go into companies, blow them up, write a report, and it would be a 200-page report of how I destroyed them and got lateral movement into infrastructure and got access to all their sensitive data. And then I'd hand them this report, and I'd say, "Hey, good luck," and I'd walk away as the consultant does, and then high-five each other, and then next year I'd come in and do the same thing again. And what we're finding is that you had a big skill gap in information security when it came to understanding attack patterns. And so you had the blue team that would take this report and fix all the findings, but they wouldn't fix why those findings were there. And so you had these long lineage of issues, and we had everything from funding to buying a bunch of technology that we hoped would solve our gap with people. And that started to change. We started to invest in people and getting them trained and figuring out what the best methods are for stopping attacks. And it's been amazing to see over this last year. I've seen a huge increase that I've never seen before in the industry when it comes to how hard it is for us to get access into computers. And I can't say anymore that the techniques that I would use 10 years ago are the same techniques that I would use today. Because there's so many different ways that we can get tripped up as attackers now, and people are coming out with more and more ways to get defense in place. It's becoming harder. And that's a great thing. I mean, we love using our cool stuff and the new techniques that we've researched, or new ways that we've gotten into access into systems. And now, by the way, it's not everybody. Some ones I still used 10 years ago, or 15, or 20, or 25, or 30. But as a whole, I see the information security space getting a lot better. And the industry is no longer just a few people, it's a number of people, and there's new people being added every day, adding different perspectives. We have a whole thing around math now and machine learning, and whether or not you believe in that or not, or the whole artificial intelligence or anything like that, we have a lot of smart people and data people that are going and looking at things and how we can recognize abnormal patterns of behavior in environments in a large, massive pool of things. We have people focusing on incident response and reverse engineering. We have a new, the newer concepts around hunt teaming and actively going on, proactively looking for indicators of compromises. We have a whole industry dedicated to a bunch of awesome stuff. And so this is the first time that I can remember that the blue team is actually getting better. I mean, there was a company that we just recently did an assessment for where we couldn't get in. It was the most frustrating thing that I could ever possibly begin to explain to you as a assessor. And believe me, we had some really good and sharp folks on it, and I was on it, and a number of us were on it, and we couldn't get in. Let me rephrase that. We kind of got in, and then they caught us as we got in. So after 3 months of really trying to go after them and using stuff that shouldn't be detected or get actually detected. And the reason why they're so successful is, first of all, 90% of the user population email access. That's one thing. That's awesome. I wish we could do that for everybody, right? 100% would be the whole goal, and then we literally eliminate a huge attack surface, right? I also wish that we also had employees that never use computers, because that would be awesome as well. But, obviously that can't be. But, for the folks that we can go and fish, they had massive detection criteria around multiple stages of attacks. So everything from the initial compromise, which, they may or may not detect, to the techniques that we would use to enumerate information on systems, to trying to get access to other pieces of system, lateral movement across environments. And so it was a really tough organization for us to get in. And that's the first time that's ever happened to us before. But we still got a long ways to go. If you look at where we're currently at right now, we've made some pretty substantial advances, but we base all of our stuff on the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or the TTPs. You might hear that term a lot. We're mirroring a lot off of the military, off of detection that we know. So we're mirroring things off of what's public, what Casey Smith and Subt posts out for application control bypasses. But what about all the 500 others that haven't been discovered yet? We look at what our threat intelligence sources are, and we look at those, and we try to put those into YAR rules and go through our environments. We build our detection criteria off of what we know. And that's interesting because in a way that's the same type of thing that we see as far as what antivirus was in the 90s. We build our detection off of signatures, things that we know. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use to go and detect and how easy it is to circumvent some of these. But really it's no different than, hey, we know that this specific piece of code is malicious, i.e. the signature-based stuff of the 90s, to, hey, if we see regsvr32 or MSHTA baking out to the internet, we probably should investigate that or look at that and say that that's bad, because we don't see those normally in our environment. So they're still signatures. They're not behavior. It's not machine learning. Now, we may have things that look at executables and in big data sets and pull those back and say, hey, I can notice that it's not a code-signed application, it has network communication ports. We haven't seen this before in our vast pool of massive data. But in every way, shape, or form, we're still looking at things in a very signature-driven way. And most organizations only know the threat models that they build off of their own open source intelligence or their threat intelligence that they give. So, hey, we have a source from X company that gives us our threat intelligence feeds, and those are the indicators that we use for looking for nation states, which are 2 years old. They're leveraging, some awesome stuff that was published 2 years ago in research anyway, and those are the TTPs that we build most of our technology off of, or most of our detection criteria off of. And it's a balance too. I mean, we're still trying to get log sources. Is anybody here getting all of their logs off of their endpoints? We should have a few hands in here. Is anybody grabbing them? You have a couple? Some of them are like, yeah, I got 2. When it comes to visibility into infrastructure, endpoint logs are one of the most important critical pieces for detection. And so if we're not even looking at that, what are our great indicators? We're going to rely off just our EDR that we're getting, or our antivirus product that's going to do most of it for us. So we have a lot of room to grow. But what's really cool to see is that instead of investment in the people, we used to build it all in the tools and the technology. But that's changing. We're still purchasing, and we're still investing in a lot of the people, but we're arming them with the right tools to go and do things. So, hey, maybe we get a Splunk instance now, even though it costs an insane amount, or maybe we don't have enough, so we're going to go to alternative like Elasticsearch, or hey, maybe we're going to go and do something else in these different areas. But we're investing in the people and training the people to go and do things, and that's an awesome thing to see. But when you look at when you look at from my perspective of what I see, and the reason why most organizations fail, is that the over-reliance on the tools and the technology become a problem. So we hope that our SIM does correlation that equals an alarm. It's our tier 1 SOC analyst, right? And if that doesn't happen, well, hopefully we have other folks looking at behavior in our environments. Maybe we have threat hunters that are going out in the environment looking for things. But they're only as good as their research, right? And how much time do we dedicate to research for our people? It needs to be like 90%. 90% needs to go into research looking for specific things out there to identify what's actually happening. And if you're not investing in the people, you're not going to find a lot of these things. Now, I would rather have a human look at every single PowerShell command that's ever run in our environment, baseline our environment, than I'd rather have a piece of technology look at it. Do you know why? So many different ways to get around detection criteria. Let's just take Carbon Black's watch list. This is not a rip on Carbon Black in any way, shape, or form. There's a lot of pros to that. There's a lot of pros to the other ones as well. You take Carbon Black's watch list. Most people will build watch lists off of known attack patterns. Like, hey, I shouldn't see NS lookup in PowerShell, or I shouldn't see IEX or invoke expression, or I shouldn't see encoded command, right? Do you know how easy those are to get around as far as watch lists are concerned? Instead, why not look at things like, what's the length of the PowerShell command? Or why is PowerShell now communicating out to the internet? Or why is it process injecting into one process to the other? Or why is system.management.automation.dll being called from non-PowerShell processes? Those are things that we should be investigating and looking at from a human perspective to say, hey, this is abnormal. Or, hey, maybe it's legitimate. I actually I was at a customer, and we were doing an exercise to look for indicators, and I found one that was like, oh man, that mirrors COFTR. Everybody familiar with COFTR? It uses like fileless persistent methods through registry modifications. I'll actually show you an example here in a little bit. But it uses MSHTA to read the registry values and then do command and control that way. So you're never dropping files to disk. I saw in one of the logs, I'm like, oh, this is MSHTA. It was evaling a registry. I'm like, hey, you guys got hit with COFTR. Like, no, that's actually our finance application. It goes to HTTP and uses registry evals and MSHTA to go and download off of the internet. I'm like, oh, okay, that was bad. But whatever, you know. But you may have weird things in environments that trigger abnormal patterns of behavior that you want to investigate. But baselining your environment and saying, well, hey, we investigated that, and while this application may be really crummy, and it's sending domain admin passwords through Telnet, it's a normal business application. So those are things that we can do to baseline our environment, and then the rest of those, deviations of those, like we should know that Exchange sends PowerShell commands out the yin-yang if you have an on-premise Exchange infrastructure. But setting those up to an analyst and saying, hey, okay, that's Exchange, we'll whitelist this in the future, and we'll look for other things that would be baselines in our environment, that's when you start to get some good detection off of humans. We can learn a lot from the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we see out there, but without direct simulations and actually going after organizations and trying to simulate how your detection works and where you can see it. Like a good example is a lot of companies will build detection off of PSexec. There's like 30 other ways of moving from one system to the other, and then using RPC and NetBIOS, like PowerShell remoting, remote desktop, a number of other ways. WMI, DCOM is a great one that typically people won't ever see. DCOM is a whole other area that most folks aren't even looking at. So let's just say there's 15 common methods that you can see out there that attackers can use to move laterally. Why not look for just lateral movement in general? Should a normal workstation, normal user account be authenticating from one system to the next? In a normal workstation environment, or workstation communication? Typically not. So why not look for event log 4624, successful login from workstation to workstation? And you could do things like key length 0, which is usually lower level protocols like SMB or RPC, and you can use those to look at different systems moving from one to the next. So looking more at the behavior of people and baselining those, hey, maybe you have help desk infrastructure that uses that to remote into other systems, and that's normal. Well, move that to a subnet, baseline that traffic, and then look at other patterns instead of looking at just PSexec, which there's a million other ways of going about it. And so the tools we use, very much still signature driven, still to this day. We have a whole research team at TrustedSec, and all we do is find different ways of getting around things like application control bypasses, if you have application whitelisting, or if you have an EDR solution, how do we get around that? Because obviously from an assessment perspective, we have to be able to go into mature customers and show them specific ways that we can get around certain things. And what's interesting about most, if not almost all of these tools, is they will build their tools around a very specific technique, but if you modify that technique in any way, shape, or form, it's usually not a problem for us. A good example, I think I have this in the next slide here. A good example on an EDR evasion is if you look at command.exe /c/q, it'll log all of that and it'll get caught, and this one specifically is for Carbon Black. But if you put carets in between, there's no problem. You can do whatever you want to. Oh, you can do the same thing for PowerShell. Or you can just go into PowerShell and do whatever you want to in the first place. You don't see anything in the interpreter. So either way, you're fine in all aspects, right? So, but we build our watch lists to look for, hey, we're looking for command.exe and anybody running commands from command.exe. Yeah, if I throw a caret in there, I'm fine. No problem. Doesn't get logged, doesn't get sent up, you don't see anything whatsoever. So why that's a problem, is we should still be sending all that data back, and we should have people looking at that, not just our EDR tool, triggering alarms and alerts. I'm not saying, again, not a bad product, it's a great product. But from a visibility perspective, if all we're relying upon is a watch list to provide an alarm for us and then going to investigate, we now have a problem with that. Yeah. And a good example of a encoded command, if you look at a encoded command for PowerShell, there's like 14 different variations of encoded command. And so you can do like -E, -EC, -EN, -ENCO. So if you're not looking for all of those, that's a problem. But you don't even have to use -EN or -ENCO. I'm going to release a tool called Unicorn, and the latest version doesn't ever call encoded command, but it uses encoded command. I use string variables to basically substitute it out when I'm going through and using it, so you have one big massive conglomerate command, and you go and execute it, and it doesn't get snagged, which is great. And I have no idea what Windows Defender is doing. I literally have no idea what Windows Defender is doing. That was last night. Last night I was going to do a demo on Unicorn, and hopefully I still have enough over there I can switch it over. But then I noticed like the version of Unicorn got flagged by Windows Defender. Normally what happens with Windows Defender, the last time it got flagged, is I had a variable name that was static. So I just changed the variable name to something random each time, and we had no problem now. So I have something static in here that I had to go and change, and it took me like 4 minutes to figure out and push a new version out. But as I was testing, I noticed that it was getting flagged, and then I used encoded command, which is just hello world, and it was getting flagged as being malicious through AMSI. So I'm like, that's weird. Okay. Anyways, what? And if you look at certain commands, I mean, some of these are easier to detect. So if you look at this one, this is just going and downloading a MDF file, which is a non-descriptive file type, and it's actually writing it out as a process to app data as th.exe, and then going and running that. So starting that process as that executable. And so this one, as a defender, we should probably see this, right? Hopefully we would see this. We would probably see -exec bypass, -command, hopefully. Maybe we look for download file for certain cases. But again, if I'm looking for PowerShell detection, and hopefully we have PowerShell detection, we should be looking at length of this. This is a pretty abnormal command that we are seeing from a command line perspective that we should probably investigate and look at as a human and determine whether or not it's malicious or not. Would you see something like this? This is from DBO from Twitter. He works over at FireEye. And I always love following him. He's a great guy, super smart. He wrote the invoke obfuscation tool for obfuscation techniques within PowerShell. Would you see this? So they use command, notice that it's command/C, no spaces in between. And then here, I don't know if you're familiar or not, but with application control bypasses, so we as attackers are recognizing that PowerShell is becoming increasingly harder to compromise without detection. So there's a lot of companies that are doing a lot of great stuff with PowerShell. So, if you look at PowerShell version 5 and PowerShell version 6, with script block logging, and with, sorry, give me 1 second. Anyways, it's a restriction mode for PowerShell. Constrained language mode, here we go. With constrained language mode, you can actually make PowerShell relatively secure and harder to actually go and implement. So we as attackers recognize that PowerShell is kind of dying breed. But great thing with Microsoft is it has a lot of different executables in there that are signed by Microsoft, right? So they're code signed, and we can use those for remote code execution. There's a whole subset, a whole list of them. Tracker.exe, CSC.exe, CBD.exe. Everybody use BGinfo.exe. That set the background. You can import remote VB scripts and get remote code execution through it. Fantastic, right? Woo! So there's a lot of these different ones here. Like one of the best ones is RegSVR32. RegSVR32 was used by the DNC hacks as well, I think. But it has its own built-in browser. It's proxy aware, and you can go and download files directly from the internet and execute them in memory. Whoever thought that was a great idea gets a cookie, because it's good for us as attackers. We get remote code execution with proxy aware Microsoft legit signed binaries. There's a whole list of these. Another good one is certutil. So if you look at what's happening here, PowerShell is being called, but it never makes a network communication. It's using certutil. Certutil has a parameter argument called ping, and you can have ping actually go and retrieve code, pull it back down, and execute PowerShell, which is absolutely fantastic, right? For us, right? For us. So certutil, is used for certificate utility. You can go and do things. You can also take a base 64 encoded binary. Like, you have the the begin certificate, end certificate in your certificate. If you just take an executable, convert it to base 64, and you have that in a text document with begin certificate, end certificate, it'll actually convert it back to a binary for you as well. So there's so many cool things you can do with certutil and legitimate Windows applications that's out there that's absolutely crazy. But again, these are things that we should be looking for. And here's some more. This is Cofter. This one here is the MSHTA that's calling the specific registry entries and then executing code with wscript.shell. So actually using registry entries itself. So it doesn't actually drop files onto disk. It uses MSHTA. And if you're not familiar with MSHTA, hopefully you all are familiar with MSHTA. But if you're on your web content filtering software, block.hta files, those are high content HTML files you want to do by MIME type. Hopefully you're blocking all those. The only thing that I've ever seen use it is there's a fallback method for AWS that uses HTAs, and that's the only time I think I've ever seen HTAs used in the wild. So you shouldn't have any major issues blocking it. But as a executable, in most organizations you don't see MSHT ever used. So you should be flagging on if MSHTA.exe is ever even used in the first place. We should probably investigate what that was for us to actively go and use. But again, these are all predominantly easier to spot as if we have the right information to a person, not necessarily a tool. Here's leveraging JavaScript, using JavaScript with MSHTA to go and launch Mimikatz directly into memory without having to execute it somewhere else. So again, more and more techniques and attacks that you can leverage for those types of techniques. So let me see if I can get the demo working here. And I'm going to try. I'm tempting the demo gods by unplugging the VGA cable that we spent the whole time in the morning fixing. So if it doesn't work, I'm just going to use interpretive dances the rest of the time. So let me display the mute there. I'll move this over. Come on, there we go. Just give me 1 second while I set this up. All right. So far, so good. And let me turn this off here. Hey, it worked. Yay. No interpretive dances, sorry everybody. Yeah, I'll do it at the end. So let me just resume these virtual machines here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a tool that I wrote. And this is a good example of hard to spot behavior. This is a command and control infrastructure that I wrote, and I actually wrote it on an airplane. I thought I had a cool idea. And what it does is it's called Trevor C2. And what it does is it'll go, and you can give it any website you want to, and it'll clone that website, okay? Or you can import your own or build your own website. It doesn't make a difference. It'll go and clone that website, and it actually handles communications through the source of the HTML file itself, and it's all encrypted, and it sprays it throughout the entire HTML source. And so when the command and control goes out, it can be used in PowerShell.net. There's stages for each one of those in the GitHub repositories. But when the command and control goes out, it goes over legitimate HTTPS communication, and its entire purpose is to emulate regular browser traffic. So when it's going and pulling it, it'll actually look at a website, like you're browsing a website. It'll know where to go inside, there's variables you can configure in it. It's already out of the box, but it'll go and automatically reassemble all those variables, decrypt that traffic, and then do command and control that way. And then it looks like when it goes to load the images for the site itself, it'll look like it's trying to pull images off from the website as it's loading the page, and it actually has all of the exfil data tucked into the image names itself. So it's really hard to spot when it comes to detection. Trevor forget. All right. So let me hop on the internet connection here. Have my MiFi up. And I'll go and run Trevor. Make sure I got my IP address. Can everybody see that okay? I can blow it up a little bit. Is that better? All right, 189.130. Just make sure I got my IP address right on the Trevor side. I would obviously, as an attacker, have this execute on their system as a PowerShell piece, but I'm going to modify it as if I already have access. And Alex Williams did the PowerShell version of this. It was really cool. So we'll get that ready. And then let me go through and I'll run Trevor C2. And again, this is all open source, so you can grab it. All right. So what you'll do, and you have to have ASCII art, of course, is we're going to, in the config file within Trevor C2 server, you can give it whatever website you want to go and do. So here I'm just cloning TrustedSec.com, but you can clone any website you want to. And so here, what's nice about it is I just added multi-threading support into it. So if you have, let's just say, 50 shells, it'll all come back as different sessions that you can interact with, and it knows how to handle the communications back and forth with it. So once we do that, we're going to go ahead and launch it from here. And this is, there's a Python version, so it's compatible with OS X, Linux, and Windows. And there's a C# version, which I think Bill, is he here? Sam? Not yet. Bill wrote one that he just said I have to test it out, which will be hopefully uploaded soon. And then there's the PowerShell version, which you can go and run. And it leverages everything with AES 256 encryption, so all the communications are always encrypted over SSL itself. So we'll go ahead and run this. Oh, hang on. I got to turn off execution restriction policies, which is super hard. There we go. All right. So we see here we get a connection back, and it doesn't require administrator rights to run this. You could always run it through encoded command to get around it, or you could leverage invoke expression, which is probably the easiest. Just have invoke expression pull off of a site and then have it execute. That's usually what I do. So we go into here. We'll see we receive the connection from the specific system. Now, the way that I would typically handle this in a phishing exercise is I would phish a user. I would use something like one-click or HTAs or Java applets or other methods for them to get remote command execution on the system. And then I would just have a one-liner script that would be obfuscated with like invoke expression to go and download this PowerShell file and execute directly into memory so you don't see it. And then we get our connection. And what's great about this is it's proxy aware. So it'll use the built-in .NET libraries to go and actually retrieve the code from the site itself. And then I can just, if you type in help here, you can see you can either list all the shells that you have, so we'll go ahead and hit list. And you can see here I have the first desktop, and I can interact with one. Now, what happens is that the itself and Trevor will inject every command that I run. Let's just say it's an ipconfig. It'll inject that randomly throughout the entire HTML source code of that site itself. So every time I'm using it, a whole new version of TrustedSec.com's cloned website is embedding code directly into it randomly throughout the entire site. And then what happens is there's beacon intervals, and you can randomize those. It uses randomized beacon intervals to go and communicate. It'll go and beacon out to that site, pull those randomized variables down, and then execute them directly into memory. So if I do an ipconfig, it'll take a second because it's got to wait for the beacon interval. We can see here we have full command and control through a HTML source code on a website. Now, how you detect that, I haven't figured out yet. Sorry. And just to show you Unicorn real quick, just to show you the obfuscation on that. And this is a free tool as well. This will give you a one-liner PowerShell command that you can run that injects shellcode directly into memory. And you can use whatever payload you want. I'm just using HTTPS payload this way. And let me read that. So here's what Unicorn looks like. Now notice here, we chunk up everything a bit. We do -W1, which is Windows, the window hidden, -command, and then here we use string variables to then reassemble encoded command down there at the very end. So you never actually run encoded command in any way, shape, or form, and you're still getting your encoded command stuff through most of the EDRs out there, which is nice. And then what's also nice is a lot of them started building in like automatic recognition of base 64 encoding. So to get around that, all you need to do, not that one, is just split up your base 64 encoded strings with pluses, and it gets around those as well for automatic reassembly of base 64 encoded strings. So just a heads up on that. Let's hope this works. No. Might be interpretive dance then. There we go. So if you look at that example of Trevor C2, the reason I built it is because if you look at what attackers are leveraging, they're leveraging legitimate communications. DNS is a great example. HTTPS is a great example. We don't use 4444 anymore. We don't use, certain ports to communicate outbound with. And what's interesting is still a lot of companies, there's a huge focus on egress filtering, like 2005 to like 2010, 2012. And for some reason, we just stopped talking about egress filtering. And that's still a big issue. Like a lot of companies don't do solid egress filtering out there. Still have FTP and SSH and other protocols that aren't necessarily being inspected outbound, which is a horrible, horrible, horrible practice, right? And so if you look at legitimate communications, we know that attackers are going to try to emulate legitimate communications and legitimate traffic, and those are things that we should be looking at and how to go and actively detect those. So while an example, if we're not looking for patterns past the initial foothold, and that's why I wanted to talk about Trevor C2 and why if you don't detect that piece, what happens after that? So if you don't detect the initial command and control piece where an attacker gets into your infrastructure, which could be using something that emulates legitimate behavior in a website, what do you do at that point? There's so many things that we can leverage that are living off of the land. If you've seen it, there's a talk at DerbyCon, living off the land. And so there's some good stuff that we do as attackers, right? The first thing we typically do is, hey, maybe we'll enumerate users. Why should we ever see a normal user enumerating a domain admins group, doing net user or net group, domain admin / domain? Should we ever see that in our environment? Probably not. Maybe an IT admin is using that in some way, shape, or form, but the signal to noise ratio, that's going to be pretty substantially low, right? So those are some good ways of net commands that we see. Other commands we might be using, like net use commands for moving from one system to the next. Common things that are early warning indicators. With Mimikatz is a good example. If you don't know this, when Mimikatz goes to launch, regardless of where it gets launched from, whether it's a JavaScript version or it's a binary or it's a PowerShell version, it will always import vaultcli.dll, which is an encryption library. So vaultcli.dll gets imported into memory every single time. So if you ever see PowerShell or VBA or executables that aren't in your normal Windows directories launching vaultcli.dll, what does that mean? Probably got a problem, right? So we can build detections off of the ways that attackers go after systems that look at the patterns of behavior versus the actual specific attack that caused the compromise. And that's what's most important is we put all of our eggs in one basket to say, oh, hey, we're going to detect everything we possibly can on Meterpreter. Well, there's like 3,000 other different ways of getting command and control that's not Meterpreter or a Cobalt Strike. If you're building your tools off of pen testers, it's not necessarily what we're looking for. And so that's where the red team really comes in. Leveraging red to continue to improve on our threat model and what our understanding around our threats are, and to continuously try to enhance those and build those up over time. Huge advocate of red teaming in both internal and external, which is awesome. And what's awesome to see in InfoSec as well is we're starting to use military tactics. I think the Shadow Brokers release was actually a pretty good thing to see from obviously a horrible thing from a military capabilities perspective, but at least giving us insight into how we work. And so you're seeing a lot of these tools. Now we're coming up with cool tool names now, like Silent Panda 32 and all these other things, right? So now we have new cool tools that we use, but we're modeling those very much off of the techniques and military operations of the military, which may or may not be good, having come from there as well. So if we look at our threat models and how we build those out, looking at our business demographics of what are we trying to protect, maybe countries or specific organizations, what their capabilities are, mapping those to threat intelligence and known and unknown sources. So still the same of what we traditionally do, but then you start looking at, well, how do we start to simulate those and where we have gaps in those? If anybody's familiar with the MITRE attack framework, there's some really great stuff out there, and if you haven't looked at it, take a look at the MITRE attack framework. It's a great way of saying, hey, here's the actual commands to run to test these specific different types of group type of behaviors, and what do we see and what do we not see. It's actually like an Excel spreadsheet you can run. And I think you actually have a little tool you can run. Like click, I want to be APT 30, or I want to be APT 29, and simulate those, and you hit the button, and it goes and does things. It builds it off of different threat models, off of specific techniques that are out there. So cool stuff you can leverage to test your capabilities on that, but it really comes down to testing and understanding what your capabilities are. So you look at red team responsibilities. If you're talking internal red team responsibilities, it has to be research. Research has to be a core foundation of what you're doing in your infrastructure to continue to grow and test, and then start emulating specific threats or attacks in your environment, and trying to get better at behavior detection throughout there. And then, most importantly, that knowledge transfer to blue, working hand in hand. Everybody heard the term purple teaming? Red versus blue, right? Red and blue working together, not red versus blue. So using those to increase a lot of your knowledge and what's happening out there. So if you look at that, the red team output into direct defensive capabilities. And so looking at red teams, the older red team philosophy is you would hear the terminology of penetration tests and red teams being used in conjunction. And they're two different things, right? Penetration testing is there and designed to identify exposures, possibly test your incident response, look at what you're doing from your organization. But a red team is supposed to be more focused on simulating specific attacks against your organization, testing your capabilities, and trying to enhance them over time. And so, if you look at kind of the old versus new, old red team versus new red team, it's really trying to be that knowledge transfer from the blue side to really help on detection criteria. Internal versus external teams is also important. There's some pros and cons to each. If you have your own internal team, you know your organization better. You work with people with relationships, familiar with systems and businesses, and the ability to develop internal knowledge over time becomes substantial. Whereas when you're looking at external, different perspectives, fresher look on things, usually a larger knowledge database when you're going to multiple companies and getting larger data sets. It just depends. But to me personally, if you have the ability to do your own internal red team, I would go and do it. I would do it in a heartbeat. Having internal folks to be able to dedicate to work on building your day-to-day red team capabilities and your blue team capabilities is absolutely huge. And then you always have these once-a-year debates on, is pen testing dead? So now there was a big discussion and a big debate again on Twitter this year. There is every year. And it's revolutionary. Penetration testing is dead. Every year, it's like, hey, I came up with this new topic. Pen testing's dead. And so, you look at this and you say, well, I think as an industry, we're moving forward, and pen testing maybe isn't the same as it was ago or 10 years ago. It's more so on understanding what we can do to get better at what we're doing out there. So far from dead, more like a maturation of actually understanding what capabilities are, what exposures we have, and trying to build more defenses against it. So, when you hear penetration testing's dead, it was supposed to be dead in 2009, 2005, 2004, before I ever got in the industry, so still there. So, I'll wrap up with a couple things here. We are getting better at defense, but there's no question about it. And I see it from customer to customer to customer. And what's great is that, as a assessor, that's not me, hopefully. As an assessor, I have no idea. As an assessor, it keeps our skills sharp when companies are doing everything they possibly can to learn off of our capabilities and how we're doing things. So we have to come up with new techniques all the time, which is awesome. But we still have a very long ways to go. There was a debate on Twitter a long time ago between Jeremiah Grossman, who was at the time the CEO of White Hat, and Egypt, who at the time was at Metasploit and is now at Black Hills. And Jeremiah was saying that it only takes, I don't know what's going on there. It only takes an attacker one system that they didn't know that they had, that an organization or business didn't know that they had. And that's true. There's always systems out there that we didn't know were there. I always make the reference of security would work 100% if we had one security person dedicated to every single person in the company. Then you can sit behind people and be like, no, don't click that. Oh, we got an infection. I have to remove it. And pass it over to Bob next to you. He passes it over, and then it gets reimaged. Like 4 people down, comes back to you, right? It doesn't work like that. So there are always going to be systems and exposures that we have out there. But what Egypt said is well, when you finally get that compromise, the roles reverse, and it only takes one indicator of compromise to detect an attack actually happen. And that's all we're really trying to solve here is that, hey, instead of it being 6 months or a year down the road, maybe we get them in the first 5 minutes, or maybe we don't. Maybe we get them in an hour, or we get them an hour and a half, but it's not 6 months. And that's really what we're trying to do. And it's awesome to watch. Seeing the industry actually go forward and actually get better at detection has been awesome. So here's I always like throwing some stuff at the very ends of these. Some good examples of good detection. If you're not doing ETW, which is event log tracing and pulling those logs off centrally somewhere, I'd heavily recommend it. Sysmon is free. It's from Microsoft. You can go and download and install it. You can do it through root policy and push it through your entire environment with standardized configurations and everything else. And you get those logs, and what it does is it creates a subcategory of your event logs under the Microsoft product line, and then there's an event log viewer. With an event log viewer, you can pull those off. And there's some awesome stuff you can do from there. Just with event log, or just with ETW itself, you can detect things like lateral movements. You can see when MSHTA is executed, or if it has network communications. You can see Mimikatz being injected into memory. You can see a lot of different hash extractions, a lot of other things. You can see a lot of things that you can do just through event log tracing or ETW. So heavily recommend that if you're not pulling those logs off. Monitoring for suspicious behavior versus techniques. So like, look at the length of PowerShell. Why is PowerShell being spawned from child processes like Excel that we should never see, right? Or why are we seeing Outlook with child processes of Excel or command.exe? Those are key things and indicators that we can look for in our environments that are suspicious in nature. PowerShell beginning out with network connections. Looking at common ones, if you look at Matt Graber, if you look at manifestation on GitHub, there's a list of application control bypasses. He maintains a list of those. Casey Smith also has a number of those. In fact, there was one today that just came out today that you can use an SCT file to compile a binary for you, which is awesome. That just came out like literally like this morning. I think it's lexpress.exe is the new one. So that's the new one that just came out today, which is awesome. But looking for deviations of those application control bypasses. Things like lateral movement, length of DNS packets, DNS log analysis period. Are you pulling all your DNS logs? Period. Like all of them. Everything. There's a lot of good stuff in there that you can go and do detection off of. Some good prevention. This is my favorite meme ever. I literally, if I'm having a bad day, I just watch that for a few and I'm good. Yeah, it's so good. Check. So if you look at examples of good prevention, regular users, you can block regular users from PowerShell execution. So you may have developers or administrators or whatnot that need PowerShell access, but with application control, with software restriction policies, or device guard, or Microsoft's new version with Windows 10, it's all device guard and above. But with software restriction policies as well, you can block regular users that are just regular domain users from ever leveraging PowerShell. Do regular users ever need to execute PowerShell? No. Your developers might. You might have some admins that might, but your regular users on a regular basis do not, right? So carve out a group that says PowerShell users, whatever you want it to, add those people to that, and block everything else. What does that do? Shrinks your surface now, right? Now you got to worry about all your executables, which we've been worrying about since the 90s, because no one's doing application control, right? Or application whitelisting. But a common one for that, if you can do it, is blocking executables that are non-code signed in your user profile directories. What does that do? Knocks out a large percentage of stuff out there. So if you don't even have executables that can run in your user profile directories that are unsigned, stops a substantial amount of it. Disallowing workstation communication. That's how lateral movement happens. So just pop on your Windows firewall and block 139, 135, and 445. What does that do? Stops common lateral movement techniques from one workstation to the next, so I can't hop from one station to the next station. Let's just say you have the same local admin password on every workstation out there, which none of us do, right? So if you block 135, 445, 139, and I have a local admin account password to workstations, what does that do? I can't use it anywhere. I can't move from the next workstation to the next workstation because you're blocking my authentication method from one system to the next. And you may be like, well, I have help desk people that remote in. Well, carve out a subnet for them and allow 135, 445, 139 from the help desk infrastructure to be able to do the administration. You can do that within group policy and within Windows Firewall. So stopping lateral movement, big things there. Removing capabilities for DNS tunneling, which is difficult to do, but inspecting that, only allowing workstations and servers to go to specific ones. SSL termination and SSL inspection is a huge debate. We started going down that path a long time ago and then realized that it was really hard to do SSL termination and actually inspect SSL traffic as it's going through. A lot of key benefits in that for detecting command and control and beacon intervals. I'm still a huge fan of application whitelisting. I think if you can have a known good baseline and you look for deviations of those baselines, it becomes much easier to go and detect off of those versus trying to secure everything. But those are some of the key things there. So that's it for me. I appreciate everybody coming out to hear me talk at BSides. Does anybody have any questions real quick before I go? Everybody tired yet?
So you said that you've noticed that everybody's getting better at security. Is that because people are doing better things or because the tools that they bought are getting better?
It's the people usually when we get snagged. And it might be leveraging a technology that they've built up over time. But usually it's the people. Technology rarely impacts us. Like, if you look at things like what's being touted as artificial intelligence, it's trivia for us to know that that's possibly there and that we need to get around that beforehand. Or that, hey, when we're getting inspected by a sandbox or virtualization environment, not to detonate in there and to detonate when we get to our destination. Those are things that we know as attackers, and those are the things that we build in as our mechanisms. But it's usually where we get detected is post-exploitation scenarios of once we've gotten through all those barriers of their devices the people and actually looking at logs and intelligently going through those is usually what snags us, and usually where the good, when I talk about good companies and good practices, it's the people that snag us, not the tools. They have access to tools, right? But they built those tools into their program, and they use those tools, and they enhance those tools over time. A good example is that one company I was mentioning, they have a tool that they use, but they've completely customized their entire environment with new indicators, new ways they're getting in, new techniques. So, they leverage our tests to enhance and build out what they don't have. So it's a continual process. They don't even use the tool out of the box at all for what it was designed for. It's now for detecting specific things. So it's mostly the people.
Have you seen any purple team activity around with some of the major cloud providers where you have the cloud and the cloud piece, right? Where you're responsible for your apps, but your cloud provider is responsible for the layer for your apps. Have you seen that from the red and blue with some of the providers to make sure that layer is hard?
Usually from a cloud provider perspective, what we test is we'll get like a third party to audit, right? And then we'll do what they have as far as their services, and we'll work with a purple team perspective of what logs are pulling off from there, but never, usually the operating system downward. Usually they don't allow us any type of access in there. Now, there are customers that are cloud providers that, we do, or companies will do security testing for and things like that to identify those, but usually not with the companies that they're providing the services for, usually not at all, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So how do I protect my company when we're doing all the things that we look for? It's the same thing, making sure we have the ability to detect those specific things. So like we have what we call our operational infrastructure, which is an environment that you VPN into that we own, that has our own command and control and our own infrastructure, but it's completely separate away from, everything else in our environment. We have continual testing. We have people that are actively monitoring on a regular basis for those specific attacks, and we continuously make those better. So, we shouldn't see unusual activity happening in those environments that, are our systems, typically that we try to protect, and our endpoints themselves. And if we're doing assessments or tests, those are all, contained within virtual environments that are blown away after every engagement. So, from those types of things, we have a pretty good lockdown of those. All of our systems that we do all the testing from are all like Ansible configured for management and making sure that they're all baseline across the board, that they're all consistent across the board, they're all patched across the board. So we try to, maintain consistency and collaboration through all of that, but making sure that our systems are very separate. So, using, we preach what we teach and we use what we use, right? And that those are the things that make us, enhanced and continue to move on. And we have a new research technique, that we find, like one of our guys, Kevin, found a new technique for one of the EDRs. We build that into our program and make sure that we're continuously getting better at detection as well. So it's a reciprocal across the board. All right. Oh, I got one more, and then I'll call.
Procedural thing. Could you turn your microphone off and just speak to the crowd to see how that sounds without a microphone?
Do I sound better? Worse? Good? Better? I have a deep voice, though, and I can talk loud, so some other folks might have a worse time with that. But yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Hopefully I can talk.